All right, so get this. We're diving into Elon Musk taking on the Pentagon.
Yeah.
You know, the guy behind Tesla and SpaceX is now challenging the way the Department of Defense spends your tax dollars and develops military tech.
Yeah, it's a pretty fascinating situation. We usually see these private companies working with the military, but Musk is pushing for a level of transparency and efficiency that makes some in the Pentagon, well, uncomfortable.
Let's unpack this a bit.
Yeah.
We know that Musk already has a foot in the door, right? SpaceX launches satellites for the military, and Tesla is working on those electric Humvee prototypes. So he's not just some tech bro shouting from the sidelines. He's got skin in the game.
Exactly. And that's what makes this so intriguing. He's seen firsthand how this military procurement process works, and he's been publicly criticizing its sluggish pace. He's pointed to the F-35 fighter jet program, for example, which has been plagued by delays and cost overruns for decades.
Yeah, and that's one of the most expensive weapons programs in history,
Yeah.
right? I remember reading that it's cost taxpayers over $1 trillion.
Yep.
Yeah, it is. And it's a prime example of what Musk is railing against. He argues that this traditional defense contracting system is bogged down by bureaucracy and risk aversion. He thinks projects like the F-35 could be completed much faster and cheaper if the Pentagon adopted some of the agile development methods that are common in Silicon Valley.
So instead of these massive multi-year contracts, he's suggesting a more iterative approach, like build a little test, adjust as you go.
Precisely. Think of how software companies like Tesla constantly update their products based on user feedback and data analysis. Musk believes that a similar approach could work for certain military projects, leading to quicker deployment of new technologies and ultimately a more effective defense force.
Well, wouldn't that be risky?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, military equipment needs to be incredibly reliable. You can't have a software glitch in the middle of a combat mission.
Yeah, that's a valid concern, and it's one that the Pentagon certainly emphasizes, but Musk argues that the current system, with its focus on avoiding any risk, actually leads to stagnation and bloated budgets.
Yeah.
He points to SpaceX as an example. They've managed to develop and launch rockets at a fraction of the cost and time of traditional aerospace companies by embracing a culture of rapid iteration and calculated risk-taking.
It's like that old saying, the perfect is the enemy of the good. Trying to eliminate all risk can actually hinder progress. But back to Musk at the Pentagon, he's not just complaining, he's actually taking action. He's demanding more transparency in how the military spends taxpayer money.
Yes, and his weapon of choice is Twitter. Instead of going through traditional channels, he went straight to the public with a tweet that basically said, "Show me how you're spending our money." He wants the Pentagon to publicly disclose details of his budget allocation process, the contracts it awards, and the performance metrics for its major programs.
It's classic Musk, right? Going
Yeah.
straight to the people and using his massive platform to force a conversation. But why is he so fixated on transparency?
He believes that sunlight is the best disinfectant by making information public. You create accountability. He argues that if citizens could easily track how the Pentagon spends its budget, it would lead to more responsible spending decisions and less waste.
It's kind of like those websites that track government spending, right?
Yeah.
They're on a much larger and more detailed scale. But isn't there some information that the Pentagon needs to keep secret for national security reasons?
Of course, Musk acknowledges that certain sensitive information like troop movements or classified weapons programs needs to remain confidential, but he argues that much of the Pentagon's budget and its procurement process could be made more transparent without compromising national security.
So it's about finding the right balance between openness and secrecy.
Exactly. And that's where things get tricky because the Pentagon has traditionally operated in a very opaque manner. There's a culture of secrecy that's deeply ingrained. So Musk's call for transparency is a direct challenge to that culture.
And that's got to be making some people in the Pentagon pretty uncomfortable, right?
You can bet on it.
So how has the Pentagon reacted to Musk's very public inquiry? Has anyone pushed back?
Well, it's been a mixed bag. There are some within the Pentagon who are sympathetic to Musk's arguments. They recognize that the current system is inefficient and could benefit from some fresh thinking. They might even see Musk's involvement as an opportunity to shake things up. But there are also those who are deeply resistant to any kind of change, especially coming from someone they see as an outsider.
Yeah, it's going to be a little unnerving for them, this tech billionaire questioning their long-held practices and potentially disrupting the way things have always been done.
Absolutely. And there's the question of Musk's motives. Some critics argue that his call for transparency is self-serving. They say he's just trying to get a bigger piece of the defense contracting pie for his own companies.
So is Musk a crusader for government reform? Or a shrewd businessman looking out for his own interest? Or maybe a bit of both?
That's a question worth exploring. What's interesting is that Musk has a history of pushing for transparency, not just in government, but also in his own companies, for example. He's a big advocate for open sourcing Tesla's patents, which allows other companies to use their technology freely. He's argued that this kind of openness actually fosters innovation and benefits everyone in the long run.
Okay, so there's a track record of transparency there. It suggests that he might genuinely believe in its value, even beyond its potential to benefit his own companies.
Right. And that's what makes this situation so fascinating. We have this incredibly complex issue, a clash between two very different worlds: the fast-paced, innovation-driven culture of Silicon Valley and the tradition-bound, secrecy-shrouded world of the Pentagon.
And at the center of it all is Elon Musk, this larger-than-life figure who's not afraid to challenge the status quo and who seems determined to drag the Pentagon kicking and screaming into the 21st century.
It's a story that's still unfolding. So the question is, what impact will this clash have on the future of government accountability? Could Musk's actions be a turning point, or will the status quo prevail?
That's a great question, and it's one we'll dive into in the next part of our deep dive. We'll explore the potential implications of increased government transparency, not just in defense, but in other sectors as well. We'll look at the role that technology can play in promoting accountability, and we'll ask the tough question, are there any downsides to a more transparent government?
Stay tuned.
Okay, so we've established that Elon Musk wants the Pentagon to open up its books and be more transparent about how it spends taxpayer dollars. But let's zoom out for a second and look at the bigger picture here. What if this idea of radical transparency spread beyond the military?
That's where things get really interesting. Imagine a world where all government agencies, from healthcare to education to infrastructure, operated with the same level of openness that Musk is advocating for.
That's a pretty radical concept, isn't it? I mean, we're
Mhm.
so used to government being this big opaque machine to suddenly have all that information out in the open. It's kind of mind-blowing.
It is, and it would require a massive cultural shift, but think about the potential benefits. If citizens could easily track how their tax dollars are being spent, how decisions are being made, how policies are being implemented, it could lead to a more engaged and informed citizenry.
And potentially a more accountable government as well, right? If officials knew that their actions were being scrutinized by the public, it might make them think twice about, wasteful spending or shady backroom deals.
Precisely, transparency acts as a powerful deterrent against corruption and inefficiency. It forces those in power to be more responsible and responsive to the needs of the people they serve.
But let's be realistic, this isn't going to happen overnight. There's bound to be resistance from those who benefit from the current system.
Of course, there will always be those who cling to secrecy and resist change, but I think we're seeing a growing demand for transparency from citizens, especially as technology makes it easier to access and share information.
It's like that old saying, sunlight is the best disinfectant. The more information we have, the less room there is for shady dealings.
Exactly, and technology can play a huge role in promoting transparency. We're already seeing the emergence of platforms that use open data to track government spending, visualize budget allocations, and monitor the performance of various agencies.
Yeah, I've seen some of those websites that they can be pretty eye-opening. I remember finding one that tracked how much each member of Congress spends on travel and office expenses. It was fascinating and kind of disturbing.
That's just the tip of the iceberg. Imagine a platform that used artificial intelligence to analyze vast amounts of government data and identify patterns of waste or fraud or blockchain technology to create a secure and transparent record of all government transactions, making it virtually impossible to hide corruption.
Whoa, those are some seriously powerful tools. It's almost like we're on the verge of a transparency revolution.
It's certainly possible, and it's not just about tools and technology. It's also about changing the mindset within government itself. It's about fostering a culture of openness and accountability. It's about empowering citizens to participate in the process and hold their elected officials accountable.
So it's a combination of top-down and bottom-up change. The government needs to embrace transparency, but citizens also need to be engaged and informed.
Absolutely. It's a collective effort, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. There are potential downsides to radical transparency that we need to consider.
Okay, let's talk about that. What could go wrong?
Well, one concern is that too much transparency could compromise national security. Some information like troop movements or intelligence gathering needs to remain classified to protect our country.
Yeah, that's a valid point. There's a reason why certain things are kept secret.
Right. And there's also the risk that transparency could be used as a weapon. Imagine if sensitive personal information about government employees or private citizens was made public. It could be used for blackmail, harassment, or even violence.
So there needs to be safeguards in place to protect privacy and prevent the misuse of information.
Absolutely. And we need to be mindful of the fact that transparency is not a cure-all. It's a tool that can be used for good or for ill. It's up to us to ensure that it's used responsibly and ethically.
So it's not just about making everything public, it's about finding the right balance between openness and secrecy, between individual rights and national security.
Exactly. It's a complex issue with no easy answers, but I think it's a conversation that we need to be having because the potential benefits of a more transparent government are enormous.
I agree, it could lead to a more efficient and accountable government, a more informed and engaged citizenry, and ultimately a stronger democracy.
That's the hope, and it's something worth striving for.
All right, so we've explored the potential benefits and risks of a more transparent government. But let's bring it back to Elon Musk and his challenge to the Pentagon. What impact do you think his actions will have on this broader push for transparency?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's,
Yeah.
it's hard to say for sure, but I think Musk's actions have at least started a conversation. He's brought the issue of government transparency into the public spotlight.
And he's shown that even the most powerful institutions like the Pentagon can be challenged.
Exactly. He's kind of like a gadfly poking and prodding the establishment and forcing them to confront their own shortcomings.
I like that analogy. And even if he doesn't achieve all of his goals, he's planting seeds. He's inspiring others to think differently about how the government should operate.
Right. He's showing that it's possible to demand more transparency to hold those in power accountable, and that's a powerful message.
So what's next? What are some of the possible scenarios that could unfold as a result of Musk's inquiry?
Well, one possibility is that the Pentagon actually embraces some of Musk's ideas and starts implementing reforms to increase transparency in certain areas.
Okay, so a best case scenario where the military actually takes his suggestions to heart.
Exactly. It might start with something small, like publishing more detailed budget breakdowns or creating a public database of contracts, but even small steps could create momentum for more significant changes down the road.
And that could inspire other government agencies to follow suit. It's like a domino effect.
Yeah. Precisely, another possibility is that the Pentagon resists any meaningful change. But Musk's actions create enough public pressure to force Congress to act. We could see legislation that mandates greater transparency in military spending or procurement processes.
So even if the Pentagon doesn't budge, the issue could be taken up by elected officials who are more responsive to public opinion.
Right, and of course, there's always the possibility that nothing really changes. The Pentagon digs in its heels, Congress fails to act, and Musk eventually moves on to other projects.
That's the cynical view, but it's certainly a possibility. But even in that scenario, I think his actions will have had a lasting impact. He shifted the conversation, raised awareness, and planted the seeds for future change.
I agree, and he's shown that it's possible to challenge the status quo even when it comes to something as seemingly impenetrable as the Pentagon.
So it's a story that's still being written. We'll have to wait and see what happens next. But I have a feeling that this is just the beginning of a much larger movement towards government transparency and accountability. What do you think?
I think you're right, and that's what we'll explore in the final part of our deep dive. We'll examine the broader implications of this push for transparency, the role that technology will play, and what it all means for the future of democracy.
All right, so we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. We've talked about Elon Musk's challenge to the Pentagon, the potential benefits and risks of radical transparency, and the role that technology could play in promoting government accountability. But here's the big question. What does it all mean for us? What's the takeaway for the average person listening to this?
Well, that's the question we should all be asking ourselves, because this isn't just some abstract political debate. This is about how our government functions, how our tax dollars are spent, and ultimately how our democracy works.
Yeah, it feels like we're at a crossroads. On the one hand, we have this growing demand for transparency, fueled by technology, and a sense that the old ways of doing things aren't working anymore. And on the other hand, there's resistance from those who benefit from the status quo,
Yeah.
who want to keep things shrouded in secrecy.
Yeah. It's a classic power struggle, but I think the momentum is shifting towards greater transparency. People are more informed and engaged than ever before. They're demanding to know how their government works and how their money is being spent.
And they have the tools to do it with social media, online forums, and data analysis platforms. Citizens have more power than ever before to hold those in power accountable.
Exactly, and that's what's so exciting about this moment. We're witnessing a fundamental shift in the relationship between citizens and their government. It's becoming more of a two-way street, with citizens playing a more active role in shaping policy and demanding accountability.
But it's not just about demanding transparency from the government. It's about demanding it from all the institutions that have power over our lives. corporations,
Yeah.
nonprofits, media organizations, they should all be held to a higher standard of openness and accountability.
I couldn't agree more. Transparency needs to become a core value across society. It needs to be embedded in our culture, our institutions, and our daily interactions.
So what can we do as individuals to promote this culture of transparency? How can we make a difference?
Well, the first step is to become more informed. Educate yourself about how your government works, how decisions are made, and where your tax dollars are going. There are tons of resources available online, from government websites to independent watchdog groups.
Yeah, and don't be afraid to ask questions. Challenge your elected officials. Demand answers. Use social media to raise awareness about issues that you care about.
Exactly, and support organizations that are fighting for transparency and accountability. There are a lot of great groups out there doing amazing work.
So it's about being informed, being engaged, and be willing to speak up. It's about recognizing that we all have a role to play in shaping a more transparent and accountable future.
That's the key takeaway here. This isn't just about Elon Musk and the Pentagon. This is about all of us. It's about the kind of society we want to live in and the legacy we want to leave for future generations.
It's about empowering ourselves and demanding better from those in power. It's about creating a world where transparency is the norm, not the exception.
And that's a world worth fighting for.
Well said. So, to everyone listening, we hope this deep dive has given you some food for thought. We hope it's inspired you to be more informed, more engaged, and more vocal about demanding transparency and accountability from those who hold power.
Remember, the future is not something that just happens to us. It's something we create together.
And that's a wrap on this deep dive. Thanks for joining us.